There is a moment in every interaction when people decide how seriously they are going to take you. It happens before they know your history, before they know your achievements, before they understand what you are capable of. They notice how you enter the room, how quickly you speak, whether you apologize unnecessarily, whether your eyes move away when someone challenges you, whether you tolerate interruptions, whether you seem desperate to be accepted. One of the fastest ways to lose respect is to spend your life trying to prove that you deserve it. The moment you feel the need to convince everyone that you're intelligent, successful, confident, important, or worthy, you have already placed your value in someone else's hands. You are no longer simply living according to your standards. You are performing for approval. And people can feel the difference. Think about the person who constantly talks about their achievements. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to mention who they know, what they have accomplished, how much they have sacrificed, or how many people admire them. They may believe they're demonstrating confidence, but psychologically, they are often communicating insecurity. Real confidence doesn't need constant advertising. When someone genuinely understands their value, they don't need to turn every interaction into a presentation about themselves. Your behavior communicates more than your claims ever will. You can tell people you're disciplined, but if you constantly break promises to yourself, they will eventually notice. You can tell people you're confident, but if criticism immediately changes your behavior, they will notice that too. You can tell people you have standards, but if you repeatedly accept treatment that violates those standards, your words become meaningless. People pay attention to patterns, not declarations. This is why one of the most powerful things you can do is become comfortable allowing your actions to speak slowly. You don't need everyone to understand you immediately. You don't need to correct every misconception. You don't need to explain every decision. Some people will misunderstand you, and that is not automatically a problem you need to solve. The need to prove yourself often comes from fear. You fear being underestimated, so you exaggerate. You fear rejection, so you over-explain. You fear being ignored, so you constantly seek attention. You fear appearing weak, so you become aggressive. But when your behavior is controlled by fear, other people can influence you without even trying. Imagine someone makes a negative comment about you. If your first instinct is to defend yourself with a 5-minute explanation, they have already discovered something important. They know how to pull you into a reaction. But if you can calmly hear the comment, decide whether it contains anything useful, and then continue with your life, you communicate something completely different. You show that your identity is not fragile. This doesn't mean you should never defend yourself. There are moments when clarification is necessary. There are situations where you should speak up. The difference is whether you're speaking because the situation genuinely requires it or because your ego cannot tolerate being misunderstood. The strongest people don't need to win every perception battle. They understand that reputation is built over time. If you consistently behave with integrity, eventually your behavior becomes evidence. You don't have to announce that you're trustworthy when people have repeatedly watched you keep your word. You don't have to announce that you're capable when your results are visible. You don't have to announce that you're disciplined when your lifestyle demonstrates it. There is also tremendous power in being able to say, "I don't know." Insecure people often pretend to have answers because they believe uncertainty makes them look weak. Secure people understand that admitting what they don't know does not reduce their value. In fact, it can increase credibility because it shows that their ego doesn't control their communication. The same principle applies to mistakes. When you make one, don't create an elaborate story designed to protect your image. Acknowledge it, correct it, learn from it, move forward. People respect someone who can take responsibility without collapsing into shame or launching into excuses. Your goal should not be to convince people that you're valuable. Your goal should be to build a life in which your value becomes obvious through your behavior. Let your discipline become visible. Let your consistency become undeniable. Let your standards become predictable. Let your results accumulate quietly. And stop wasting your energy trying to convince people who are committed to seeing you differently. One of the simplest ways to change how people perceive you is to change your pace. Most people underestimate how much speed communicates about their emotional state. When someone speaks too quickly, answers every question immediately, rushes to fill silence, or reacts the second something happens, they may unintentionally communicate nervousness, urgency, or a need for approval. The problem isn't speaking quickly itself. The problem is when your pace is controlled by pressure. Think about what happens when someone suddenly challenges you. An insecure reaction is immediate. You interrupt, you defend yourself, you start explaining. Your voice becomes faster. Your thoughts become scattered because your brain is focused on protecting your image. The other person may not consciously analyze any of this, but they feel the difference. They sense that they have pushed a button. Now imagine responding differently. Someone makes a provocative comment. You pause. You look at them. You breathe. Then you answer calmly. Nothing dramatic happens, but the psychological dynamic changes. You have demonstrated that you control your reactions. You aren't being pulled around by someone else's emotions. This is one reason pauses are so powerful. A pause creates space between stimulus and response. That space gives you control. You don't have to respond simply because someone expects an immediate answer. You don't have to match another person's emotional speed. If someone is angry, you don't have to become angry. If someone is impatient, you don't have to become impatient. If someone wants an instant decision, you can take the time you need to think. People often confuse speed with confidence. They believe the person who answers instantly is more intelligent or powerful. But sometimes the opposite is true. A person who is comfortable taking a moment before speaking communicates that they don't need to perform. They're processing information rather than reacting to pressure. This becomes especially important during difficult conversations. When someone asks you a challenging question, resist the instinct to immediately defend yourself. Listen completely. Let them finish. Think about what they actually said instead of responding to what you think they meant. Then give a concise answer. This demonstrates emotional control and makes your words carry more weight. Your physical movements matter too. Rushed movements can create an impression of internal chaos. Constantly checking your phone, shifting around, looking everywhere, interrupting, or moving frantically can make you appear distracted and uncertain. Slowing down doesn't mean moving like you're in a movie. It simply means becoming deliberate. Walk with purpose. Make eye contact naturally. Sit comfortably. Give your attention to the person in front of you. There is another powerful reason to slow down. It prevents other people from controlling the frame of an interaction. Pressure is often created through artificial urgency. Someone says, you need to decide right now. Someone demands an immediate response. Someone tries to provoke you and watches to see how quickly you react. If you accept their timeline automatically, they gain influence over your behavior. Instead, develop phrases that give you your time back. I'll think about it. Let me get back to you. I need a moment. I'm not making that decision right now. These statements are simple, but they communicate independence. You are refusing to let another person's urgency dictate your choices. Slowing down also changes the way you listen. When you stop preparing your response while the other person is talking, you become more observant. You notice their tone, pauses, contradictions, and emotional shifts. You begin to understand what they're communicating beneath the words. That makes you more effective because you're responding to reality rather than assumptions. The goal isn't to become artificially slow or to create some performance of confidence. It's to become less reactive. When your internal state becomes calmer, your external behavior naturally becomes more controlled. You stop rushing to prove yourself. You stop filling every silence. You stop responding to every provocation. You give yourself enough psychological space to choose your behavior instead of allowing the environment to choose it for you. A boundary becomes powerful when it stops sounding like a threat and starts looking like a decision. Most people misunderstand boundaries because they think a boundary is something you say to control another person. It isn't. A boundary is a clear statement of what you will and will not participate in, followed by consistent action. The moment you understand this distinction, you stop arguing about your boundaries and start enforcing them. Imagine someone repeatedly speaks to you disrespectfully. A weak response might be, "If you ever talk to me like that again, you're going to regret it." The problem is that this turns the situation into a contest. Now both people are focused on emotional escalation. A stronger response is much simpler. "I won't continue this conversation if you speak to me that way." Then, if it happens again, you leave the conversation. No dramatic speech, no insults, no threats, just action. That calm consistency is what gives a boundary its power. People learn your limits through repetition. If you say no but repeatedly change your answer because someone pressures you, they learn that your no isn't really a no. If you say you won't tolerate disrespect but continue engaging with people who repeatedly disrespect you, they learn that your standards are negotiable. If you constantly announce consequences but never follow through, your words lose credibility. This is why boundaries should be boring. You shouldn't need a dramatic emotional performance every time someone crosses a line. You don't need to convince them that they were wrong. You don't need them to agree with your boundary. You don't even need them to understand it perfectly. Your responsibility is to communicate clearly and control your own response. Consider how much energy people waste trying to make others understand their boundaries. They write long messages explaining why they felt hurt. They list every previous incident. They provide evidence. They demand apologies. They argue about intentions. Sometimes the explanation becomes longer than the original problem. And while they're trying to prove their position, the other person is learning that they can keep them emotionally engaged. A stronger approach is clarity without excess. "That doesn't work for me. I'm not comfortable with that. I won't continue this conversation. If that happens again, I'll leave." These statements don't require a courtroom defense. They communicate your position and leave the responsibility for your next action in your hands. This also means understanding that boundaries aren't punishments. If someone violates a boundary, your goal isn't to make them suffer. Your goal is to protect your time, attention, emotional energy, or personal standards. Sometimes that means ending a conversation. Sometimes it means creating distance. Sometimes it means saying no to a request. Sometimes it means ending a relationship that repeatedly ignores your limits. The important thing is that your response matches the situation. Not every mistake deserves permanent separation. Not every disagreement is disrespect. Not every difference in opinion is a boundary violation. Emotional maturity requires being able to distinguish between ordinary conflict and repeated behavior that consistently crosses your standards. A useful question is, what am I willing to do if this behavior continues? That question puts your attention where it belongs, on your own behavior. You can't control whether another person becomes respectful. You can't force someone to understand your perspective. You can't make someone care about your feelings, but you can decide what you will participate in. This is where boundaries become a form of self-respect. You stop asking, "How can I make them stop?" and start asking, "What will I do if they don't?" That shift gives you control without requiring domination. The strongest boundaries are often quiet. You don't announce them to everyone. You don't threaten people with them. You simply live according to them. Your availability changes. Your attention becomes selective. Your standards become predictable. People eventually understand that access to you comes with expectations, not because you demanded obedience, but because your behavior consistently communicates what you will accept and what you will walk away from. One of the most powerful changes you can make in the way people perceive you is learning to use fewer words with greater intention. Many people believe that being persuasive means explaining everything, defending every decision, and filling every silence. But excessive talking can quietly weaken your presence. When you constantly explain yourself, you can unintentionally communicate that you need permission, approval, or agreement before you feel comfortable with your own decisions. Think about how often people explain simple choices. Someone says, "I can't come tonight," and instead of leaving it there, they provide a long explanation about their schedule, their responsibilities, their reasons, and why they hope the other person isn't offended. The longer the explanation becomes, the more it sounds like a request for permission rather than a decision. A confident person understands that not every choice requires a presentation. This doesn't mean becoming cold, silent, or rude. It means becoming deliberate. Say what needs to be said, then allow your words to exist without immediately adding more. If you disagree, say that you disagree. If something doesn't work for you, say so. If you need time to think, take it. You don't have to surround every statement with layers of justification. Silence is especially powerful because many people are uncomfortable with it. The moment a conversation becomes quiet, they rush to fill the space. They start explaining, joking, apologizing, or revealing information they didn't intend to reveal. Someone who is comfortable with silence has an advantage because they don't feel pressured to perform. Imagine you're negotiating something important and the other person makes an offer that doesn't work for you. Instead of immediately explaining why the offer is unfair, you can simply say, "That doesn't work for me." Then stop talking. Let the silence exist. The other person may respond with another offer. If you continue explaining, you may accidentally reveal how badly you want the deal or how flexible you are. This principle applies beyond negotiation. It works in friendships, relationships, workplaces, and ordinary conversations. When someone criticizes you, you don't have to immediately defend your character. Sometimes a simple "I hear you" is enough. When someone misunderstands your intentions, you can clarify without writing an entire defense of your personality. When someone tries to provoke you, you can choose not to give them the emotional reaction they're searching for. The quality of your words also matters. If you speak constantly, even your important statements lose impact. People become accustomed to hearing you explain, complain, justify, and comment on everything. But when you become more selective, people begin paying closer attention because they know you aren't speaking simply to make noise. Another important part of speaking less is learning to stop arguing with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. There are conversations where information can solve a problem, and there are conversations where the other person simply wants emotional control. If you keep explaining yourself to someone who has already decided what they believe, you're not creating understanding. You're creating an endless loop. You also don't need to respond to every accusation. Someone can make a claim about you without you being obligated to prove it false. Someone can dislike your decision without your decision becoming wrong. Someone can disagree with your priorities without you needing to change them. Your ability to tolerate disagreement without becoming defensive is a form of psychological strength. This is why concise communication can create such a strong impression. When your words are connected to clear decisions, people learn that you mean what you say. When you say no, it means no. When you say yes, you follow through. When you make a promise, you keep it. Your words gain weight because you don't spend them carelessly. The goal isn't to manipulate people with silence or to pretend you're more mysterious than you are. The goal is to remove the nervous habit of explaining yourself into exhaustion. Speak when your words add value. Listen when someone else is speaking. Pause before responding. Let silence exist without fearing it. When you've said what needs to be said, resist the temptation to keep talking simply because you feel uncomfortable with the space that comes afterward. One of the hardest things to learn about self-respect is that you cannot live a strong life while making everyone else comfortable. At some point, your decisions will disappoint someone. Your boundaries will frustrate someone. Your ambition will make someone uncomfortable. Your silence will be misunderstood. Your refusal to participate in something will be interpreted as selfishness. If your entire identity depends on keeping everyone pleased, you will eventually begin sacrificing yourself simply to prevent other people from feeling disappointed. This often begins with something that looks harmless. Saying yes when you want to say no. You agree to plans you don't want. You accept responsibilities you don't have time for. You tolerate comments that bother you. You change your opinion because someone reacts negatively. You apologize even when you haven't done anything wrong. Each individual decision may seem small, but repeated over time, they teach you a dangerous lesson. Other people's comfort matters more than your own judgment. People-pleasing isn't always kindness. Sometimes it's fear wearing the appearance of kindness. You may believe you're being considerate, but underneath that behavior could be a fear of rejection, conflict, criticism, or abandonment. You aren't necessarily choosing to help because you genuinely want to. You're helping because you're afraid of what might happen if you don't. That distinction matters because authentic kindness comes from choice. Fear-based compliance comes from pressure. A person who can never disappoint anyone eventually becomes predictable in the wrong way. People learn that they can ask for more. They learn that your boundaries are flexible. They learn that guilt works on you. They learn that if they become upset enough, you will eventually give them what they want. And without realizing it, you train people to expect access to your time, attention, energy, and resources whenever they demand them. Respect requires something different. You have to become comfortable allowing people to experience disappointment without immediately trying to remove it. If someone asks you for something and you can't provide it, you can simply say no. They may not like the answer. They may become frustrated. They may try to convince you. None of those reactions automatically mean you made the wrong decision. Someone else's emotional reaction is information, but it is not always instruction. This is especially important when you begin changing your behavior. The moment you become more assertive, people who benefited from your lack of boundaries may resist. They might say, "You've changed." They might accuse you of becoming selfish or distant. Sometimes what they really mean is that you're no longer as easy to influence as you used to be. You don't have to become cruel in response. You can remain respectful while standing firm. You can say, "I understand you're disappointed, but my answer is still no." That sentence contains something powerful. Empathy without surrender. You can acknowledge someone's feelings without allowing those feelings to control your decision. This doesn't mean ignoring everyone or becoming obsessed with doing whatever you want. Healthy relationships require compromise. There will be moments when you should adjust, apologize, listen, and make sacrifices for people you care about. The difference is that those choices should come from genuine willingness rather than fear. Ask yourself why you're saying yes. If the answer is, because I want to, that's one thing. If the answer is, because I'm afraid they'll be angry, that's something else. The second answer deserves attention. Your life becomes much more peaceful when you stop treating every negative reaction as a crisis. Someone can be unhappy with you and still respect you. Someone can disagree with you and still care about you. Someone can be disappointed and eventually understand. You don't need to fix their feelings immediately. There is enormous freedom in realizing that you are responsible for your behavior, not for controlling everyone's emotional response to it. You can communicate honestly, act respectfully, and maintain your standards. After that, other people are allowed to feel whatever they feel. The goal isn't to become someone who never disappoints people, That's impossible. The goal is to become someone who can disappoint others without betraying themselves in the process. Because the moment you stop fearing every negative reaction, you become much harder to manipulate through guilt, pressure, or the fear of rejection. There is a certain kind of confidence that appears when you realize you can walk away. Not because you don't care, not because you're trying to punish someone, and not because you want to make yourself look powerful, but because you understand that your dignity is worth more than maintaining access to something that repeatedly diminishes you. The ability to walk away is one of the strongest forms of psychological independence because it removes desperation from your decisions. Think about how differently you behave when you believe you have no choice. You tolerate disrespect because you're afraid of losing someone. You accept unfair treatment because you're afraid there won't be another opportunity. You stay in conversations that drain you because you're afraid of being misunderstood. You keep chasing people who don't reciprocate because rejection feels unbearable. When you believe you cannot walk away, your standards become negotiable, and people eventually notice. They notice when you are terrified of losing them. They notice when you keep returning after being disrespected. They notice when your boundaries disappear the moment someone threatens to leave. They notice when you need their approval more than you need your own peace. This doesn't mean people are always consciously trying to exploit you. Human beings simply respond to patterns. If someone learns that you will tolerate almost anything to keep them around, they have little reason to change their behavior. Your repeated actions teach them what access to you costs. Walking away changes that equation. It means understanding that you can care about someone and still leave a situation that is unhealthy for you. You can appreciate an opportunity and still reject conditions that violate your standards. You can love someone and still refuse to participate in disrespect. You can lose an argument without losing yourself. You can experience rejection without allowing it to define your identity. The ability to walk away begins internally before it ever becomes an external action. You have to believe that your life is bigger than one person, one opportunity, one friendship, one relationship, or one moment of approval. If your entire sense of worth depends on keeping something, you will eventually become afraid to negotiate honestly. That's why emotional independence matters. When you know you can survive disappointment, you become calmer. When you know you can survive rejection, you become more honest. When you know you can survive being alone, you stop accepting relationships that require you to abandon yourself. When you know you can start again, you become less desperate to hold on to things that are no longer working. But walking away should never become an impulsive reaction. Some people confuse strength with leaving whenever they feel uncomfortable. That's not independence, that's avoidance. Real strength requires knowing when to communicate, when to compromise, when to repair, and when to leave. The question isn't, can I walk away from this person? The better question is, what happens to me if I stay? If staying repeatedly destroys your peace, violates your values, or forces you to become someone you don't respect, then walking away may be the healthier choice. Not because the other person is necessarily evil, but because the situation no longer aligns with the person you're trying to become. There's also a difference between walking away and announcing that you're walking away. People who are desperate to appear powerful often make dramatic declarations. They threaten to leave repeatedly. They announce their independence. They tell everyone how little they care. But genuine independence doesn't require an audience. Sometimes you simply stop participating. You stop chasing. You stop explaining. You stop returning to the same argument. You stop negotiating against yourself. You redirect your attention toward your own life. That quiet movement can be far more powerful than any dramatic confrontation. And the irony is that once you genuinely develop the ability to walk away, you often become less interested in using it. You don't need to threaten people. You don't need to prove that you can leave. You become more patient because you aren't operating from fear. You can communicate more honestly because you aren't terrified of the consequences. You can give people opportunities to correct their behavior without feeling trapped. Your goal is not to become someone who leaves everyone behind. Your goal is to become someone who never abandons themselves just to keep someone else. Respect begins there. The world does not need another person desperately demanding to be respected. It needs people who quietly respect themselves enough to make difficult decisions, maintain their standards, and walk away when staying requires them to surrender their identity. When you know you can walk away, you stop begging for a place at tables that don't value you. You stop chasing people who have already shown you where you stand. You stop confusing attachment with loyalty and tolerance with strength. You begin to understand that your greatest source of power was never controlling other people. It was knowing that you could control your own choices. And when you can walk away without hatred, without revenge, and without needing anyone to understand why, you become free. Protect your peace. Protect your standards. Protect the person you're becoming. Because sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is not what you say when you stay, but what you silently choose when you finally walk away.